Welcome to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast where seeing things differently inspires limitless possibilities. This podcast is being brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Limitless was created in order to inform, educate, entertain, and share stories from within the blind and partially sighted community in order to show the world that the opportunities for those who are blind or partially sighted are truly limitless. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to your host, the Executive Director and Founder of Blind Beginnings, Shawn Marcellet.
Welcome back to Limitless. I'm your host, Shawn Marcellet, and today we're talking about culture and disability because May 21st is the World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development, which is a United Nations sanctioned international holiday promoting diversity issues. So I've got a great group of young youth and young adults with me today for representing different cultures to have this conversation. So welcome Clement, Ishita, Jugaad, Jinnie, and Nika.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, big group today. So maybe you can each introduce yourselves, remind us your level of vision and what is your culture?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ishita, and I have a condition called cone rod dystrophy, which primarily affects the central field of my vision. So I can see general shapes and colors, but I have issues with seeing finer details. And my ethnicity is Indian. And now when we refer to North Indian, we say in India, this is where the northern actual part of India. And in the West, I believe we say East Indian to refer to anyone who is from the country of India. So within this podcast, we will kind of use them interchangeably of North Indian and East Indian, referring to the same culture.
So hi everyone, my name is Clement, and I am actually from a few different places. My dad is from Taiwan, and my mom is part of the Chinese population of a little country called Brunei, which is a small country off the northwest edge of Malaysia, I believe. And so I identify myself as Taiwanese, Brunei, and Chinese Canadian. I was born here, as were both of my siblings, and my parents immigrated here, and they met and married here. And I am totally blind, also from birth, and I have a condition called Nori disease.
So I'm Jinnie. I am completely blind, and I have been since birth. I am part of the East Indian culture, so my parents were born in India and they immigrated to Canada. And I was born in Canada. My Punjabi name is actually Harjinder, but to fit into the Canadian culture and fill that gap, I shortened my name to Jinnie as well.
Hello, everyone. This is my first podcast, and I'm Jugaad, and I'm from North India. Although that's my main culture, I'm a Sikh. And my name is Jugaad, and I was born in Punjab. And then, I stayed in Mumbai, which is in southwest India, for 10 years. Although I'm still through and through a Punjab person and a Sikh, and I'll go into more detail about that later. And I moved to Canada 2.5 years ago in 2018, I think. Yeah. My level of vision is a condition called Leber congenital amaurosis, LCA. I can see very little because I can see light and darkness. I can find the difference between light and darkness. And if an object is very big, I can see it. But if it's small and far, I cannot see it. And when I'm looking at people, I can see shadows and big objects without any detail, which might sound creepy, but it's not.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Nika. And I have a condition called Peter's anomaly. Essentially, most of my vision is in my left eye. I can see shapes, colors, but with details, I have to get up close in order to see them. And I am Persian. My parents were born in Iran, and they, along with my brother, emigrated to Canada 24 years ago.
So, I mean, there's I think sort of the most common maybe model or view of disability is the medical model of disability, where something is not working correctly and needing to be fixed. There's also a social model of disability where nothing needs to be fixed. It's just the environment is not set up for somebody with a disability. So therefore, it feels like you have a disability because you're not able to function, I guess, along with everybody else because maybe things aren't accessible. But then within different cultures, there are also other or different views of disability, which is kind of why we thought this was an important topic. Wondering if you could each share how disability is viewed in your culture or in your family. Maybe it's maybe unfair to suggest that an entire culture, everyone in that culture feels the same way. So we want to kind of mention that this is sort of based on our own personal experience or your own personal experiences, not wanting to generalize too much, but I think that there are probably some commonalities.
So I think from what I have noticed in the East Indian culture that I have been a part of, disability is quite complicated. There are some people who have the purest intentions in their heart who believe that, that you should be fixed, because to them, they think, oh, this thing that isn't working, we want to make it work, right? We want to make you whole again, in a sense. And, though that, again, so they have that more of that medical view there, but they don't actually realize the social harm that it's perhaps causing to the person, especially if that person is someone like me who's born in Canada, who has seen a different view. For someone in India, maybe, who doesn't know anything else, maybe that's okay. Because I actually went to a school for the blind in India when in 2008, so I was 8 years old, to just visit. And for them, they didn't know anything different. For them, it was all about that because they don't have this other view that they could contrast it with or compare it with. And I think another thing is, as well as the medical, it's also pitiful. If some cultures, I know, not Sikhism, which is a little bit that I'm a part of too, but more in a different part of India, if they believe in karma or past lives, etc., the view is more that you deserved it, or that you had done something to get yourself there, or that's something that your parents have done that they have to live out, just kind of like a punishment in that way. As well as being pitiful, that, people have to pity you, do everything for you, and stuff like that. But on a different note as well, I've also noticed that people are really willing to help. And I think, okay, yeah, people are really willing to help, maybe in the wrong ways too. But sometimes I find the people in my culture are like so hospitable. They'll see me out in the streets, and because of my culture, they'll actually approach me and be like, hey, you're one of us. Do you need anything? Like, they'll check up on me more. I mean, yeah, some of them can be more invasive, but the thing is, they'll see my skin and they'll want to check up on me more, which I really appreciate.
I would say I agree with Jinnie a lot. I'm also East Indian, like I mentioned, and I definitely have experienced the same experiences as Jinnie. I haven't been to India other than just like short stays or just being there for the summer. I haven't been in any schools there, but I would say for the most part, what I've seen is very similar to what Jinnie has said. And I would also add that from my experience, it's kind of different depending on the type of disability you have. I know people in my personal life who have psychological or cognitive related disabilities, and it is seen as more non-existent. And I think that there's also a conversation about it being similar in the West, where it's just like, we can get into that, but it's very different when it's, again, a physical disability, in that sense of where, again, you can see the person is physically disabled or has a visual impairment or hearing impairment or anything of the sort, versus something that is psychological, cognitive, or neurological. I have noticed a difference. And yeah, I would say similar to Jinnie. Also, I have had negative experiences where people, may get really invasive and wanna help, like, just or ask questions and may have that pitiful view of me, thinking and making assumptions about me, saying, maybe she can't do this or whatever. But also, they're really hospitable and they do want to help, and it comes from a place of just wanting to help someone of your own kind.
I'd also want to just chime in. I don't know if you've noticed this just as well. The level of vision I find also plays a role in that. We do also have the same challenges, but I find that if you have no vision at all, it's like a spectrum as well. Like the help and the pity is worse. Whereas if you have some or a lot, it's like, oh, they don't need to use a cane, or, oh, they at least have that so they can kind of fake it through. I don't know if you've noticed that as someone who has partial sight, but yeah, I just think that's an interesting point too.
I have. Yeah, I definitely have. When I am with friends or anyone I know who is fully blind, and I just talk about them saying, oh, this is my friend, I explain them, and there's always that, oh no, associated with them, like, oh, I feel so bad for them, versus when I talk about myself, they don't say that. I think they don't see me as blind, and I'm putting quotes around that because I don't think again, like you said, it's a spectrum, and a lot of people don't know that. And I definitely try and educate, saying I consider myself on the spectrum, and I do consider myself blind as well. But again, there's definitely that greater value of pity when someone is totally blind or has a lot less vision.
So in India, I've lived like most of my life. Like I said, I moved here 2.5 years ago, and I've lived 10.5 years or 11 years of my life in India. So mostly in the Southwest, but like I said, my culture is of the North. And even though in India, like, schools are not good, and being disabled is like a big flaw and a big problem. Personally, in my culture, which is Sikhism in North India, in Punjab, I've never felt left out, which I'm pretty grateful for, because whenever we have any religious events, like say Vaisakhi or Diwali or just any event, if we are going to the Gurdwara in Jalandhar or anywhere, I've never felt left out. And people usually, like in my family, my grandparents and other far relatives and my parents and grandparents and all the family, they have tried to include me in everything mostly. So about the North Indian culture, I have a positive opinion. Yeah, because all of them encourage me to go into the religion more, and I love it. And like, I feel very close to my identity, if I say it. And my name is Jugaad Singh, and like Singh is the a name that came from our 10th guru. And in our religion, blind people are not thought of as disabled and people who can't do anything or have done something bad in their last lives or anything like that in the Northern Indian culture. But we think, everyone thinks in our culture that being blind is nothing wrong, and if you have caliber and if you are worthy, and not worthy, but like if you have caliber, if you have talent, blindness does not interrupt your talent at all. And I was always encouraged in my culture to like do this part. And another fun fact, like our holy book Guru Granth Sahib has 1,430 pages, and a blind person brailled all of them without embossing them. So
Wow.
yeah, it took him 14 years, but so blindness is, according to me, in our culture, it's not thought of as disability, and we look towards the talent, and we just think like everyone pray for being okay. Yeah, I've never felt left out of my religion. However, India might be, but my religion has always accepted me.
So just to add on to what Jugaad said, I definitely do agree with what he said in terms of relating to the Sikh religion. I myself am also Sikh. So what he mentioned, the Gurdwara, which is the Sikh temple, that is where we go to pray. And there's actually a lot in around Canada. If you ever, if you ever see it around, it's definitely, it's a holy place that Sikhs go to pray. So that's what he was mentioning. And I definitely agree. One thing that we have in the Gurdwara is langar, which is food that is served to everyone of any walk of life, any religion. You can come in and enjoy a meal. And it's a really humbling experience. So I would say, similar to Jugaad, any experience that I've had in a religious context has always been positive because of the reasons that he mentioned.
I find that interesting that both of you had positive experiences. And I think that's really, really great. And I would love to talk more with you guys about that, because for me personally, I haven't did as much. I mean, my family is Sikh as well. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I do love it. But for instance, I wasn't able to take my cane into the temple for the longest time because it was seen as something, maybe is shameful, and people would stare and ask questions. And you know what? I don't blame, for not us for not taking it in, because it's the people. No one wants to be stared at and looked at, right? And it's seen as something dirty. And not wanted there. And I remember one year I did take it in for the first time, and I was bombarded by a lot of people who wanted to just pray for me, just pray for it to just go away. And that's not how it works. You can't just heal it. There's nothing to be fixed. And I just think that's interesting how you two have had the positive experiences in the religious context. Because I also know that religion or places of religion have their own rules about whether you can bring in service animals and stuff like that as well.
Like in the Gurdwara, I felt like that was the place that no one ever changed any subject or asked anything different, because I have met people who have actually said that we pray for your blindness to go away. And although it does feel like a little bit sympathetic, I do appreciate that they think like that. And whenever my identity is, like I said, the Singh, and we have some objects and things that we wear, like the patka, the turban, and the kada that you wear on your wrist to show that you're from that religion. And in the Gurdwara, they always I feel like I'm a true part of my religion. And with the cane in India, otherwise the India, I never had a cane in India, honestly. When I came to Canada, I learned mobility. I never knew what a cane was in India, for that matter. But I have felt sometimes sympathetic, but that was I appreciated it. And I feel like I'm a true part of my culture.
Had a great range of experiences even in the same culture, so it's really interesting to hear about. I would also say my culture is a little bit mixed on this one. So Chinese culture as a whole, is a lot of it has to do with the beliefs in karma, even if that might not be what we call it. Some people who don't practice Buddhism might not say they believe in karma, but they believe in things that you've done in the past having an effect. So a disability is definitely something that a lot of people will see as something that either you did yourself to bring on, or your parents did something. And out of the religious context, it might be because, your parents weren't healthy enough, or because they did something before they got married that they shouldn't have done, or whatever. And so there'll be 1.5 million ways to try and find your way around it. And as a result, disability is not for everyone, maybe, but from my experience, whether that's from my family or from people on the street, it's definitely something that needs to be taken care of. Being content with your disability is not something that's seen as normal. And it's definitely kind of it leaves you in a situation where the country or people who are not disabled feel like they have to take care of those people around them who are, because they're less fortunate and they're more pitiful and all the rest. But also that, that practically that translates to a lot of disabled people being employed in very few occupations, such as massage or singing or computers. And it's really interesting in Taiwan. There is a whole facet of media that is kind of a sensationalized disabled singers or choirs that are made up entirely of disabled people. And it's a really interesting idea of I think if I was to say, just speaking as a general idea, a lot of what Asian culture focuses on, East Asian culture specifically, Chinese culture and the like, is giving disabled people what they need to live to a certain extent, but it's definitely a separate world where we come from, I think.
Yeah, so disability in Iran is also kind of complicated, and part of it is because it is a developing nation. And I would say it varies mostly geographically. So in the more poor kind of villages, people with disabilities and blindness specifically have fewer opportunities. The kind of pitying factor is also pretty common, but most prevalent there, just because parents are kind of scared to let their kids go out or have experiences because they don't want to deal with kind of what the public will say, and they don't want to deal with the feeling sorry and the pity from the public. But in larger cities, I would say the narrative is shifting very slowly. So schools for the blind are pretty common in Iran, and now in the past 10 years or so, it's slowly becoming more common for some blind people to be able to be integrated into regular public schools. My grandma actually knew someone fully blind who went to a public school. And even like there are new organizations that are kind of being founded where they teach blind people different skills. And 15 years ago, those weren't really a thing, and now they are. Nowhere near kind of what Blind Beginnings does, but I would say it's kind of slowly making progress.
Can I just add really quickly? I forgot to mention that, yeah, schools for the blind are definitely still common as well in Taiwan and China. I don't know so much about Brunei, which I should try and find out about. But Brunei is, by virtue of just being such a really small country, there isn't a whole lot of information around that I've been able to find. But schools for the blind are definitely commonplace. Although in Taiwan, at least, I know that there's definitely more integration that's been starting to happen in the past 10, 20 years or so, too.
Would you say that it kind of varies on region as well for you? Like, do you think people in like...
Yeah, for sure. So, like, that's a very good point. Like, so in Taipei, because it's a big city, you're going to find, I think there's 2 schools for the blind, But if you go out to other places that are more rural, you might only find 1, or you might not find 1 at all, in which case then the education prospects become a lot dimmer, or it may force integration because the fact that they're not able to attend a school for the blind means they have no choice but to send their kids to whichever school happens to be close by. So I definitely agree. I think it is regional. And, the fact that it's regional has some drawbacks, but also some unintended benefits, which is super interesting to look at.
I'm just thinking about accessibility in general. Like, so, I mean, there are schools for the blind in the United States still. There's really only 1 in Canada. There's schools for the blind in the UK. So, sort of that European culture as well. However, all of those places that I've mentioned have accessible transit, and like the cities have been developed so that people who are blind can travel independently and get from point A to point B, which I'm wondering in India or in Iran or in some of the Asian countries, like, is that the case?
I would say not, because when I saw the School for the Blind in India, people had to be guided and taken in cars. They did have canes though, but the problem in India though, and like I do understand this, is that it is a developing country. In the part that we were in, it was villagey, and so I don't think that we didn't even have proper roads, let alone starting to even think about accessibility. But in the city, in the more bigger cities, it's not like that either, though, because I'm sure everyone has heard about India traffic. Like, you just cross if you can get across. If you see a spot and there's no car and no one's honking at each other, you run and get across that road.
I would agree. And I think the biggest difference between Iran and Canada is that here in Canada, we have orientation and mobility instructors that actually work with us in our community. And in Iran, there is O&Ms, again, it's very, very slowly being integrated, but that's only available to people who have a higher socioeconomic standing, who are just physically, in the right place in larger cities. They have access to it. And even then, the O&M instructor doesn't really come to their house and work with them. They go to wherever the facility of the organization is and do the O&M there. So it's kind of more they have to transfer the skills to their own community, which is possible. But I would say it's so beneficial also to work with an O&M instructor in your community. And here in the lower mainland of British Columbia, the audible traffic lights are pretty common, and those aren't a thing in Iran either.
I just want to say one thing too, though. Shawn, to your question is, how can a area be accessible if people don't even think we can travel?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, right. Because I think in India, I think it's a great question. But if they don't even think we can travel, so what is accessibility to them? Do they even know what it is? Those are just some of the questions that come to my mind.
That's a really good point, and I would add to that, and it's really interesting to look at it from another side, which is the idea that yes, blind people can travel, but blind people can only travel if we make it easy for them. And I think that is what happens in a lot of in places like Taiwan and Japan, which I've experienced both. I haven't been to China or Brunei, so I can't say much about there, but Taiwan for sure. In bigger cities, yeah. Again, it's where you have. So Nika brought something up really interesting when she said it depended on socioeconomic status, and I find that really interesting because in Taiwan, that might not be the case in terms of people, but in Taiwan and Japan, it certainly depends on where you go. If you go to a big city that is more economically prosperous or has more people and more of an established infrastructure, you're going to find more accessibility. You're going to find audible signals. Taiwan has Braille in quite a few places, and everything has audible announcements, so you can hear, most things as you walk by. Japan blew my mind when I was there. They have tactile marking, so the directional tile that we have here on SkyTrain platforms, they have them on the sidewalk. And they have different types of tactile marking to let you know if you're walking across a building entrance, or whether you're just walking on straight sidewalk. They have audible signals. They have Braille on most of the train stations in Tokyo that I went to. And again, everything is audibly announced. So it's really interesting to think about how that question that Jinnie asked in terms of how in some cultures the question is, where do we even start? Because if we don't think they can travel, then what do we do in the first place? Whereas other countries will say, well, they can travel, but we have to make it this way, and they can only do it this way. There's no other way. So that's a whole other layer of complexity, which I find really fascinating to look at.
So to to try to answer that question about mobility and how people travel there, when I've lived there, like I said, I didn't have a cane. And for one thing, like in the school, I've walked with touching the walls, which is yeah kind of hard because there were tables in between, and the schools are pretty crowded. Like I said, there were 18,001 people in the school that I came from, and there aren't any audible signals. So if you need to walk, if you need to go across, you just run across, which is you hit or you miss. I mean, it does sound dramatic that way, but for blind people it is like that: hit, miss. If you need to run, if you don't, then you just need help from someone. Simple. I mean, not. I mean, it's harsh, but it's simple. Like that's what happens. And in terms of like culture, so yeah, coming back to the topic, like in other ways, like of traveling or of learning, like there's a organization called NAB in Mumbai where I lived for most of my life, and the person that came there, first thing, I didn't have a support worker or a vision teacher or a mobility teacher. And the way I learned was listening to the teacher, which yeah did not work as well. But the the NAB teacher, it's a blind organization teacher, came once every 2 or 3 weeks, and they taught me about the stylus and how to use braille with stylus, which to be honest, it's pretty painstaking work, like using a stylus to write stuff. Although I didn't do it as much, but and traveling, definitely not a good place to travel. You definitely need help. No way that it's possible. There are people who I met, like who are totally blind and use a cane to cross roads, but like I said, you hit or you miss. It's dramatic, but you do it. And but in culture, like when I like I'm saying, like Jinnie said, like East India, they believe more in karma and all. Yeah, like about disability and that. And in North India, like I was saying that um there are sometimes some sympathy, but yeah, it's it's good. Like another example of being accepted into the culture is like there's a kirtan, which is like it's like a Shabbat and kirtan. Those are like, I don't know if Jinnie or Nika or Ishita, either of you know it, but it's like a Shabbat out of our holy book, and you say it using drums and pianos and harmonicas, harmoniums, all those stuff in the Gurdwara and even at home. And many blind people do that. So, in terms of real life in India, it's too hard. Like, but in terms of culture, you can do kirtan, you can be accepted.
Jugaad, I did do kirtan. So I went to a school that was religious and was based around Sikhism. So, and I think Jugaad brought this up where it's, again, culture and religion are really heavily intertwined, I believe, in North Indian culture. So, and it could depend per person, honestly. But in the school that I went to, the religious aspects of kirtan, of doing everything that were religious, participating in the Gurdwara and doing services there, was fairly accessible, and I didn't have any issues with it there because there wasn't honestly much help there for me, as opposed to academic studies where there was EAs and there was equipment, and I did have a teacher, like a vision teacher and an O&M instructor. There was no aid in there, and I think they didn't know how to provide it. So it was that mentality of, oh, I got to get it done, I'm just going to do it hit or miss kind of thing. So I didn't have too much issue with it. But Jinnie, I'm curious, if being totally blind, if you had a different experience.
Yeah, I've done it as well. For me, it was more of a way. It's something I did enjoy, but then we got into the heavier competition stuff, and I was really busy in school, so I did have to quit. I actually did learn from a teacher who is blind. But unfortunately, I felt like it was being done as of something like, this is your only way you can make a living. Like, you be like him, you can become a teacher, you can sit at home and make your living. And I don't want to do that. I want to go out and just like quote normal quote people. I want to go out there and get a job. And along with that, it was kind of pushed on, if you do this and if you can get to the closest to God that you can be, you'll be fixed. And for me, that wasn't something I wanted to continue.
So what is it like growing up in Canada, but being part of a culture that maybe views disability in a different way?
So in terms of what it's like growing up kind of with a foot in each world, it was really interesting to me because I remember growing up and being in families, family environments and family circles where people would say, oh, if the other kids are going swimming, well, Clement can't go because he obviously can't do it. Or if the kids were going to go bike or play outside or whatever, I could, if the kids were going to go ride bikes around the block, I could go bike too, but I could only bike around, our backyard. Contrasting that with going to school where, like, my teachers and EAs would, kick me out the door if I was staying in classrooms during break, because they were like, well, the weather's beautiful out there. What are you doing inside? Go play. And I'll be like, but I was told I couldn't. And they'd be like, nah, why don't you try it and see if you can or not? So it was really interesting for me, and it still is, because what I find, and this is possibly specifically my family experience, so the others can chime in, but I find that the Western world that I live in outside of my house is a lot more open to the things I can do and the things I can't do, as opposed to my experience in my physical and culturally at home, in my house, or whether it's at a relative's house or any sort of cultural setting, versus the more Canadian setting that I grew up in terms of schooling and daily life outside of my house. And it's a struggle, because I think what that leaves me in is a situation where I kind of go, okay, well, how much do I pay attention to what people from my culture are telling me, and how much do I pay attention to what my own experiences have shown me, because the two are very, very different. And so it lets you see, I think, both sides, and it lets you pick which one, to go with. Because some people might be more comfortable with saying, well, if my family believes this, then I'm going to believe it as well, because I don't want to cause them any undue stress. Whereas others, such as myself, may be more of the type to say, well, my family said this, but my experience has shown me different, and I'm more likely to follow my experiences and what I've kind of concluded on my own, as opposed to simply following what my culture says I am.
So just adding to what you said, Clement, about being like said while the break happens in your, school or wherever, like to be going playing outside in India. Like what had happened was, in my school, when we used to have a short break and a long break, like we do have here, lunch and that. And when we had lunch, instead of saying like go out, I used to be said stay in. So what had happened was,
that's really interesting.
So the break was 45 minutes long. So the only time I went outside the class, the only time, was before, as soon as it started, to go to the bathroom and to avoid the crowd as much as I could, because I was going to go by the walls and eat my food, go back to wash my hands, then come back and then wait for 20 minutes and just like, well, do nothing. And in school, like I said, there wasn't any accessibility because I never participated in any PE or anything like that. I tried to, as much as I could. I tried to do the running stuff, because that I could do without even the cane if it was an open ground. But when it was like a volleyball or handball or any other game like that, then the PE teacher used to send me to the staircase and say like, um, you could sit there and relax. I was like, I don't want to relax, but I mean, the thing is like the culture there in yeah, this is the school life, but in yeah. So in when I say culture in India, it's mostly culture means religion, which and being in Canada now, the school life is improved pretty dramatically. It's improved a lot.
Yeah, I think for me, having Canadian privilege, I am super grateful for that. If my parents hadn't moved here, who knows what my life would have been like? Who knows if I even would have been here? But I think Canada has a lot of resources. And, sometimes when I'm advocating so hard and fighting for accessibility so hard, I remind myself how good I have it compared to other people. That's not to say that we shouldn't do those things, but to remind myself that I actually have opportunities that people who are blind and in my culture don't. And I think that's really cool. Another thing too is that I've actually created a hybrid culture. Taken parts of my Indian heritage and Canadian heritage and made it into like a hybrid culture. And we actually learned about these in a communications class, hybrid cultures, and they are a thing. Intersectionality, everything crosses over, and I think that's quite interesting. As well as being in Canada, I'm presented with an opposing view. And, now I'm stuck between these two things, and I'm trying to make culture life and Western life work together in a way that they can somehow be harmonious for me. And sometimes it's really hard because, it's like something Canadian, like, be super independent, for in the culture, it's like, oh, you will get hurt. It's from a good place. But it's like, okay, like I have these two things. I got to combine them somehow now because both of them are my identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I especially with both points of creating a hybrid culture, because that's what I've done as well, but also about the first part about realizing that, as much as we gripe about Canadian disability rights and advocacy and accessibility, I do think we have to remind ourselves again and again, and this is why I'm so grateful that I go to Asia every once in a while, because I remember, and it's kind of it almost forces you to wake up and realize that both sides have good and bad, and so you have to learn to harmonize the two, and if need be, create a hybrid culture and try and make it work. As difficult as it is, it's always worth it in the end. But in Canada, Jinnie's right that we do have a lot of resources and just a lot of room to have conversations like this, even because this kind of conversation where I come from would not happen very often.
At Blind Beginnings, we encourage independence, and we kind of really try to shift perceptions of blindness to one of that's more positive. And I'm wondering, for your parents, like how that lands, if they're, it's already a bit radical. Maybe it's already like we're pushing the boundaries even for North American culture sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. We're pretty radical just in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even, so it can be a stretch for anybody, I think, to see blindness as a gift or a positive or just not a negative. But definitely that, we value independence and really encourage that. And if you grow up in a culture where the idea is sort of that you take care of your people with disabilities and do for them, that must be challenging to be the child who's saying to the parent, I want you to let me do this. And the parent, that's not, their natural kind of thought process.
I am kind of lucky in the sense that my parents, with Iran standards, maybe not to me, but to Iran standards, my parents are quite progressive and open-minded. So they kind of they were protective of me, and they were kind of worried when I say I want to do things like, study nutrition in school. And I'm not sure how much of it has to do with disability and how much because I'm like their second child, like their little girl, basically. But a lot of times, like with my dance, for example, like, that was something that like my mom would tell me, like, it might not happen, you might not be able to do it. And I was able to do it, or proving that I could go to Europe by myself with my school. That was something that we didn't think was possible. And we thought that we'd have to have a personal chaperone for me, just me. And like, I was kind of able to shatter that boundary and that misconception. And I think with more time that's passing, the more I'm personally proving to them, and just, their friends and other members of my family see what I'm doing and, tell my parents like, oh, like, good job at raising this, amazing young woman. I think they're really seeing that I can actually achieve a lot. And I wouldn't say go as far as saying disability is a good thing, but I definitely don't think they view it as a negative thing.
I would agree. I think for me, my parents, man, oh man, in the beginning, like for me, I really had to push for it. But now, like they are not full on Western parents, and they shouldn't have to be. They shouldn't have to give up who they are. But to India's standards, they are so progressive. And yeah, sometimes I still don't see that because I'm still stuck here. But when I look at it objectively, I'm actually allowed to go to school and gain an education. I'm actually allowed to travel. Yeah, they might have their worries and they might nitpick about it, but I'm actually allowed to do those things and go to Blind Beginnings events and, take my cane out now everywhere I go, things like that. And I think for them, the narrative is changing as well. And they're seeing that slowly. And, it's hard too, because they've been raised this way for so long. And I think what's happening here is now going forward, the generations are going to change, because my sisters, my brother and me, we're going to have kids, and we're probably going to teach them differently. And I think that's the coolest thing too, that's coming out of your question about Blind Beginnings. It's like my sisters and my brothers, they're like seeing this, and that's what they're probably going to teach to their kids. So the narrative is on a way to the shift here because of them moving to Canada.
So yeah, it comes pretty much down to this, doesn't it? Like everything kind of has like if we are from Taiwan or India or anywhere, like we do have a good side, we do have a bad side about the culture, the country. The culture can be good, the country can be bad, or anyway, like, and in Canada, something is good, something is bad. So you basically have to like kind of harmonize them and like work it out yourself.
I agree with Nika, Jinnie, Jugaad, honestly, everyone here. My experience with my parents have been overall very positive. And I think one, I would say, kind of obvious observation that I've made just from talking for everyone here is that perspective is everything. Coming from India, my parents had a certain perspective. Coming here, it's very, very different. And you can kind of, like we talked about before, making your own culture out of that, seeing what you like, what you don't like, taking on things that you think are good, things, maybe leaving behind things that are bad. But I would say I'm very fortunate that I don't have many arguments or anything like that with my parents. And again, that could be also because I do have a bit more vision than Jinnie and Nika and Jugaad here. But I would just say that my experience has been overall quite positive.
Well, thank you so much, you guys, for being here today. This has been a very informative discussion. Obviously, yeah, there's a range of views of disability across cultures and just accessibility across countries. And it does provide a lot of perspective for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
For sure. This is a fascinating conversation. I think that it's something that us as blind people living in the Western world don't think about a lot in terms of actually engaging with that perspective from different cultures.
Yeah.
All of us know that different cultures are, in existence, obviously, and that each of them has a different perspective on blindness and disability in general, but I don't think we engage with that as much as we could or perhaps should.
It's cool bringing together kind of our respective cultural identities and also our identity as part of the blind and partially sighted community, because it's kind of like Jinnie mentioned earlier, that intersectionality, bridging it together, like bringing it all together and relating it.
Yeah, and on top of that too, like the one thing I would say to anybody from any culture who is listening, talk about it. I know, for me, my experience in the culture that I am a part of, it's just something that should never be talked about. And I think it needs to be talked about. Start somewhere to start talking about it.
I would agree. And interestingly, growing up as just Canadian, it wasn't really something that was talked about in my house either, just disability in general. So it's always good to talk. Well, thanks again for sharing with me. I really feel honored to be part of this conversation. You've been listening to Limitless, the Blind Beginnings podcast. If you have a question, a comment, a future topic request, please send us an email to limitless@blindbeginnings.ca. Share our podcast with a friend, subscribe, leave us a rating, and join us next time.
This podcast has been brought to you by Blind Beginnings, an organization based in Vancouver, Canada, that supports children and youth who are blind or partially sighted, along with their families. Music for this podcast is composed by Shawn Bishop and Clement Chow. Production and audio editing by Rob Minot. For more information about Blind Beginnings and the work it does to support children and youth who are blind and partially sighted, along with their families, visit us on the web at www.blindbeginnings.ca, and also remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.